Welcome back to session 2. I hope you guys enjoyed your groups, lunch, and the first message, A Character Who Wants Something.
Yo, what is up, y'all? What's going on? Like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell.
What is this?
This is my character, what I want, baby, and that's clout.
You know, that actually was a really good idea.
Luke Skywalker was just your average farm boy on the planet of Tatooine. He lived with his aunt and uncle who needed to buy some droids to help out on the farm. And sure enough, one of those droids, R2-D2, had a special message hidden inside. It was a message from a young girl, a princess, who needed help. And when Luke saw this, he was, a little bit confused, but he knew that something had to be done. She needed to be helped. Now, unfortunately, that night, R2-D2 ran away, and Luke was so disappointed and concerned about the princess and the message that was inside of R2-D2. But Luke had a really busy life and didn't have time to go looking for lost droids, let alone helping a princess. So he went back to bed, and in the morning, he bought a different droid and just got back to farming. If that were the story of Star Wars, it would have never become a movie, because a story where the hero avoids conflict and only chooses to live a safe and comfortable life is not a story anyone wants to hear about. And yet, that is exactly the kind of story that most people choose to live. You see, a story without conflict is just a boring story. Without conflict, the character has no reason to become someone greater. Every great story requires the character to accept and embrace and go through conflict, including your story. But because conflict is hard and oftentimes it reminds us of our weaknesses, most of us will build our lives around being safe and comfortable and avoiding conflict at all costs. But not you. Not anymore. Because today you become a character who wants something and overcomes conflict. See, I think part of the reason that the story of Jesus is actually so compelling is because his entire life revolved around conflict. He was conceived out of wedlock, he was born in a barn, he was from a poor family, was adopted by Joseph, and had an assassination attempt on his life before he was 2 years old. He took on this corrupt religious system, was hated for being a friend to prostitutes and thieves, he addressed medical and hunger issues, he sailed boats during storms. He was wrongly accused of being a criminal, betrayed by his closest friends, beaten and crucified, which eventually killed him. Could you imagine if the story of Jesus was, he was born into a wealthy family, and he slept in a nice bed, and he was well educated and took advanced classes at school. Eventually he got this job, and he bought a house and started a family, and he lived happily ever after. That would be the worst redemption story ever. Conflict is such a vital part of living a great story that Jesus actually tells us to look for it and embrace it. Jesus says things like, in this world, you will have trials. He says things like you're in good company if the world hates you, because it hates him too, right? Even Jesus' followers tell us to consider it pure joy when we suffer for following our guide, Jesus. See, great stories change the world. And if you want to tell a great story with your life, you'll need to embrace conflict and learn to overcome it. So let me ask you a question. What conflict will you need to face in order to get the thing that you want? See, in 2019, I decided I wanted to be someone who was exceptionally generous. I'd seen what God could do with other people's generosity, and I wanted that to be part of my story. But I had a serious problem. Juniors and seniors, you need to hear this. 10 years out of college, I still had $1,000 of student loan debt. It's hard to be generous when you have to pay $400 every month towards your student loans. But you see, I had found my conflict. What about you? What conflict will you need to face in order to get the thing that you want? I mean, maybe you're dating someone who's an absolute jerk, but he's cute, right? She's controlling, but your mom really likes her. You found your conflict. Maybe you're trying to get into college that has an incredible engineering program, but you don't have the GPA or the ACT score yet. Conflict. Maybe you're just tired of feeling down all the time, and you know that you need to get some counseling and start eating better and sleeping better. Conflict. Every great story needs to have conflict, and here's why. External conflict kickstarts internal transformation and growth. Now, during session 1, I mentioned how the hero is never the same person at the end of the story as they were at the beginning. I mean, they go through this character transformation, right? And the reason that a character grows and transforms to become this better version of themselves is because of the conflict that they face throughout the story. I mean, think about your own life. The biggest moments or seasons of change for you probably happened during some of the hardest times of your life. See, and that's because of the conflict you were facing kickstarted something inside of you, something that would force you to transform and become a better person. So let me ask it again. What conflict will you need to face? And a follow-up to that question is just as important. Why is the conflict important to you in the story that you want to tell? I mean, conflict should remind you of what's at stake if you don't overcome it. I mean, you need to know why the conflict is actually important to you. I mean, I wanted to be this exceptionally generous person because I believe to the core of my being that a generous life will always be better than a stingy life, and that generous people are going to be the ones who set the stage to make the world a better place. But my conflict, that $20,000 student loan debt, it was keeping me from the life that Jesus was calling me to. I mean, my conflict was important to me because if I didn't address it, it would take me another 15 to 20 years before I could start living the kind of life that I wanted to live and blessing people the way that I believe God wanted me to bless people. You see, I knew what was at stake and I knew why my conflict was important to me. And because I did, I was fueled with a motivation to do the hard work of overcoming my conflict. I mean, if Jesus didn't know why he needed to die, do you think he would have just willingly been beaten and crucified? No way, not a chance. I mean, to this day, crucifixion is understood as one of the most horrible ways to die. It was so horrible that they had to create a new word to describe the pain of crucifixion. The word excruciating. It literally means from the cross. But because Jesus understood why his death was important, why his death would set people free and reconnect them with God, because he knew why, he was willing to go through the conflict. That is the power of knowing why your conflict is important to you. So, why is your conflict important to you? And once you can answer that question, once you've found that deep motivation that will drive you to overcome your conflict, that's when you must make the decision to start doing the hard work of overcoming your conflict. See, overcoming conflict, it will always require something of you. So what will overcoming your conflict require of you? I mean, for me, $20,000 is a lot of money, right? If I was ever going to overcome that conflict, it would require me to get a lot of help from people who were better with money than I was. And it would require that I was going to need to stop spending money on other things that I really enjoyed. I mean, it meant me having to give up some of my free time so that I could meet with someone who could help me wrap my head around my money. And it meant canceling subscriptions and getting fast food less often. It meant making tons of phone calls and having to try to get discounts on things. I mean, it was hard. And after all of those things were done, I then had to put all of that extra hard-earned money that I just saved towards that $20,000 debt. I mean, I couldn't even spend it on myself. I mean, what I can tell you is that none of it was easy. I mean, it was time consuming and it was uncomfortable. It was full of these difficult conversations and hard decisions. See, it required of me way more than I thought it ever would. But I was determined to overcome my conflict because I knew why it was important to me. And here, I need to give you a warning, because how you decide to overcome conflict is the most important part of your story. Because every decision that you make becomes a permanent part of your story. I mean, what kind of story do you actually want to tell? And what kind of story do you want to be told about you? You remember the four characters from session one, the victim, the villain, the hero, and the guide? You see, we all start as victims, but it's how we handle conflict that either keeps us stuck as a victim, turns us into villains, or moves us to become heroes. Now, you already know that if instead of overcoming conflict, you just decide to avoid the conflict and you choose whatever's comfortable and safe, you already know that that will keep you stuck as the victim character. So we don't need to talk about that. But if you choose to overcome conflict by whatever means necessary, by just getting it over with as quickly as possible, that's what will turn you into a villain. I mean, villains are all about overcoming conflict. They just do it by only thinking about themselves. I mean, they use people, and they cut corners, and they cheat the system without thinking about how it might affect other people. I mean, they overcome conflict not by doing what's right, though, but by taking the path of least resistance. I mean, this is why a character in the Bible, someone like Judas, will forever be known as the villain. Because when conflict came his way and he was pressured to betray Jesus, instead of doing what was right, he overcame the conflict by just doing what was easy. I mean, he even got rich doing it. But because of how he overcame the conflict, that's how he became a villain. You see, it's tempting to think, like Judas, that your story is more important than the stories of other people. But if that's how you think, you will make decisions that hurt people, and you will become a villain. But when you choose to overcome conflict by listening to your guide, by doing what's right, by venturing out into the uncomfortable and with this posture of humility and teachability and determination, that's when you begin moving in the direction of becoming a hero. See, how you decide to overcome conflict today is like a rehearsal for how you'll choose to overcome conflicts in the future. I mean, how would the character you want to become, right, your aspirational identity, how would they overcome this conflict? See, when you take the hero's path to overcoming conflict, you're rehearsing to be able to take on even greater conflicts in the future that can have an even greater impact on the world. So what will overcoming your conflict require of you? I mean, I had to give up a lot in order to start overcoming my $20,000 conflict. But I knew it was where my guide, Jesus, was guiding me to. So I stepped into that story. I mean, I fought through the discomfort of not buying my favorite coffee or eating fast food every week. I mean, a little part of me died every time I saw that little extra money I'd saved have to go towards paying off this enormous debt instead of going towards a new laptop or a new phone or things that I wanted. I mean, some days, I was faced with decisions that were so hard to make. I mean, the struggle was serious. But the day I sent my final payment and paid off that $20,000 debt, you guys, it made all of those difficult days so worth it. I mean, who I am today is not who I was a year ago. I mean, I'm telling a better story and I'm able to be exceedingly more generous than I've ever been. I mean, this is my story. And Jesus is writing a far better story with my life than fate ever could. And honestly, that I ever could. And he will write a far better story with your life too, if you let him.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed that message. We have a busy day ahead of us, so here's the schedule.
At 4, we have free time. You can go grab some dinner because at 7, we have our banquet in person and live streamed at church. At 8:30, we have our talent show in person and also live streamed. And at 10, we have session 3.
Here are the questions to go over in your groups. Number 1, read John 16:33. If conflict is what forces us to grow, why do people tend to avoid conflict? Number 2, when you think of how you typically respond to conflict, do your responses tend to keep you as a victim, turn you into a villain, or move you to become a hero? And question 3, on your story card, fill out the "and overcome conflict" section, then talk about your answers with your group. Have a great time in your groups.